But we don't tend to think about it because inflammation seems like sort of like a ghost in the machine. You know, it's like, ooh, inflammation, but it truly is, you know, if you look at the root word, you know, coming from the Greek and the Latin, it means to set on fire, right? And so there are these,
flame.
right? And these are some of the outward symptoms we might think about. It's just like pain, swelling, bruising, burning, aching, those type of things. But there's the majority of the inflammation that folks are experiencing oftentimes go unnoticed. There are these little kind of chronic low-grade fevers or little fires burning that are contributing to a lot of different metabolic disorders. And the reason that our bodies are doing it is really the inflammation is sending out a distress signal from different tissues to recruit and call in the immune system to support in defending against infections and repair. And the list goes on and on. Inflammation is actually not a bad thing. It's a
healer,
natural,
right?
Right. If we would get a wound, we would never heal without inflammation. If we got an infection, it would be deadly without inflammation. It's an important part of our evolution and our health.
What's the difference between that and chronic inflammation?
Right. So what we generally think about is acute inflammation when we think about like a short-term intrusion, maybe an injury or an infection, for example, which the inflammation might last a few hours, even a few days.
Right.
But if inflammation is lasting for a long amount of time and also showing up in the wrong places, it can be devastating. And so now we're talking about chronic inflammation. And if we're venturing into chronic inflammation, we've got to look at what are the underlying components? What is creating the fire? What is throwing gasoline on the fire as well? And so if we take one of the conditions that you mentioned, so right now here in the United States, we've got about 242 million of our citizens are overweight or obese. 242 million.
Out of how many?
Right around 330,000.
330 million?
I'm sorry, 330
So
million,
240 million
yeah.
are obese.
So we're looking at somewhere in the ballpark of 70 to even upwards of 80%
How is
of our
that
citizens.
possible now?
Exactly, that
How
should be the
have we
question.
gotten this far?
Yeah.
How is it just food is too accessible? Or the wrong kinds of foods are too accessible to so many people now? Social media, is it laziness? Is it, why have we shifted from being a healthy nation, I don't know, probably 60, 70 years ago to an unhealthy nation?
Yeah, it's really a perfect storm of all the things. So the first thing to look at and to ask is what's going on, because our genes expect certain things from us. Our DNA expects certain things to have healthy outcomes or healthy cell replication, healthy expression. And so we've got to look at what are the things our genes expect of us. Our genes expect us to move.
Right.
For example, we're the most sedentary culture in the history of humanity and recorded human history. We're the most sedentary culture to ever exist right now.
All of humanity, or just USA?
Right, especially the U.S. We're the LeBron James. We're the king of sedentary behavior.
We're the Homer Simpsons.
We're the
yes.
Dope. Yeah, we're really leading the league in these things, and so that's number one. Also, our genes expect us to get adequate sleep. And this is something that we've talked about multiple times on the show, but it's built into our evolution. And if you think about sleep, it's very strange because you're incredibly vulnerable, you're unconscious. You'd think we might evolve out of it just for safety. But the thing is, so many wonderful, absolutely amazing things take place during sleep that we just haven't found a way to replicate, right? So even with the reduction of inflammation, which we'll talk about more, we have microglial cells in our brain, it's kind of the brain's immune system, and it's primarily active when we're sleeping to reduce inflammation, to clean out metabolic waste, and things of the like. So,
what would you say are the 5 biggest benefits of the greatest night of sleep consistently? Like, what are the 5 main benefits that you get if you get deep REM sleep for 7-8 hours a night consistently, no interruptions, no light exposure, all the things you talked about in your other book, Sleep Smarter? What are the 5 main benefits that come from that versus interrupted sleep, 4 hours of sleep, staying up late with the phone, having coffee late at night, all that stuff? What's the benefits?
We'll just power pack bullet point with these. Number one, and this is because our culture, I always like to connect to something visceral, and people, we care about how we look.
Of course.
Right?
Yeah.
And so
you're younger.
Nobody's waking up like, I want to look so old today. I want to get my George Burns on. I want to be as old as possible, or I want to feel bad today about the way that I look, or they're not waking up like, I just want to look terrible and feel terrible today. And I've run in my clinical practice, I never met one person, and people might argue these things and get into a because of our cognitive biases. I've never met anybody who wants to be unhealthy.
Right.
Every single person wants to be healthy. Now, with that said, this is where sleep really comes into the fray, because over the years, me being a nutritionist, I thought that food was everything, because it was for me. It was my bridge. But there's many paths to the goal. When you're sleeping, it is the most powerful anabolic state that you can be in. So you're just teeming with what we call these, quote, anti-aging hormones. The release of human growth hormone, for example, that really it's also known as the youth hormone.
Yeah.
And also in that lane of body composition and overall health and fitness, researchers at the University of Chicago did a very simple study. They brought folks in and they wanted to see what would happen with their weight loss. They put them on a calorie-restricted diet, and they wanted to see what would happen with weight loss when they were well-rested versus when they're sleep-deprived. And so they put them under both conditions. And I love studies that do that. They put people under both conditions to see what would happen. And so they allow folks to get 8.5 hours of sleep in one phase of the study. And they tracked all their metrics, their weight loss, et cetera. And then they sleep deprived them for the other phase. So they was getting 8.5 hours, now they're getting 5.5 hours. Tracked all their metrics.
Same group.
Same group on the same exact calorie restricted diet.
Same calories, yeah, everything.
But when they were sleep deprived versus when they were adequately rested, when they were getting enough sleep, they lost 55% more body fat just by sleeping more.
That's crazy.
It doesn't even make sense.
Were they working out
rationally.
the same, or was it like no movement? What was it just like?
Everything is the same.
same.
This is what I love too.
Wow.
It's a ward study. So they're under the conditions where they can track everything.
Oh, wow.
Now here's another part of the study I don't often talk about, is that they actually did biopsies. So they actually took
The fat cells.
cells to see what would happen with their fat cells under the different conditions. And what they came to the conclusion was that your fat cells actually need sleep too.
Oh.
Because when the fat cells were not, when they weren't adequately rested, their fat cells actually became more insulin resistant, which should become that should put up a huge red flag, because insulin resistance is one of the classic signs is carrying more belly fat, right? So the fat cells themselves, looking at them versus when you're well rested versus when you're sleep deprived, your fat cells themselves become insulin resistant. And it's just going to lead to downstream problems with your liver, lipogenesis, the creation of new fat. The list goes on and on. So that's just one thing. So number one. Number two, the cognitive performance. And I love this study. This was published in The Lancet. And they wanted to see what would happen when they took physicians and had them to complete a task and tracked all their numbers. Then they sleep deprived them for 24 hours, which is not abnormal in the field of medicine, and had them to complete the same task, which is a simulation of different surgical type of simulation.
Man.
They made 20% more mistakes doing the exact same thing, and it took them 14% longer to do the exact same thing. All right? So, and this is a big problem in our culture. Again, we mistake being busy for being effective, right? And so that's number two thing, the cognitive performance. Number three, and it parallels with cognitive performance, is the health of our brain. And so researchers at UC Berkeley did brain imaging scans, and we talked about this before, but they actually looked at the sleep-deprived brain, just again, 24 hours of sleep deprivation, and the part of the brain that's associated with executive function, right? So decision-making, distinguishing between right and wrong, social control. So the prefrontal cortex, the more human part of our brain, that part of the brain goes cold. The activity of that part of the brain just literally, as we're more and more tired, just shuts down.
With the lack of sleep.
Coupled with more activity in the amygdala, which is very much more primitive, driven by emotion, very much concerned with survival of self. And so that part of the brain just lights up like a Christmas tree, or Las Vegas sign, you just came back from Vegas. So these changes happen in the brain very quickly. And that leads into number three, reduced cognitive performance. So being able to manage our emotions, being able to manage our decisions. And then we'll go to number four, it's going to lean into this as well with the brain function, is I talked a little bit about this earlier. During sleep is when your glymphatic system, which is the brain's waste management system,
Cleansing it all out.
It's 10 times more active when you're sleeping than when you're awake. So and your brain is doing literally trillions of activities every second. And there's a lot of metabolic waste that takes place. And you have to have this cleansing system, this cleaning system, or you're going to have a buildup of things like amyloid beta plaque, for example, which that is strongly correlated with Alzheimer's disease. It's an inability of the brain to clean itself, and also insulin resistance in the brain we could talk about later. But we're wondering again, why are these issues going up? Why is brain inflammation going up? These are the things. Are we getting enough sleep for the processes that normally just naturally want to happen? They do it on their own. Are we getting that? The final thing.
So 4 is the cleansing.
Right.
Cleansing.
Cleaning. So this is associated with disease prevention of the brain, longevity of the brain. And number 5, this is tough. There's so many different things that this can benefit. But I would say for me and you as well, like we want to be able to perform. We want to be able to use our body and our mind to compete,
right.
to get out and to play, to have a good time. And one of the fun things that I talked about in my first book, Sleep Smarter, was research that was done on basketball players, collegiate basketball players at Stanford. And they found that simply by increasing the amount of sleep that they were getting, not training more, not doing anything else differently, this shaved a full second off of their sprint time just by increasing their sleep.
Wow.
They significantly improved their free throw shooting and their 3-point shooting just by getting more sleep. All right. And these are things that we just kind of on a periphery kind of know that, but at the same time, are we utilizing it? So some of the greatest athletes in the world right now, sleep is a part of their training. LeBron James, it's a part of his training. Usain Bolt, same thing. It's a part of his training. Mm-hmm. Now, Serena Williams, the list goes on and on and on. These things weren't taught to us when we were in high school.
No.
It was just like,
get up at 4 a.m. and lift.
Yeah, right. Just go run into somebody. You know what I mean? Make a play. Keep your head on a swivel. But today, it's really built into the system.
Yeah.
Also, the strength training programs are built into the system, which is beautiful because, again, when we were in high school, it was very, some stuff was starting to take place with folks being in the weight room, but it wasn't a big emphasis. Whereas now, if you look at different sports, like a good friend, it's so weird for me to say this right now. This is like the coolest thing. I actually got chills. Ozzie Smith, right? So having the opportunity.
St. Louis icon, man.
Icon. When I was a kid, my 2 idols were Ozzie Smith and Michael Jackson.
Wow, yeah.
And I tried to wear the Thriller jacket to school and I got drove. That was not a good look. But Ozzie Smith could be my role model and I wanted to play, I wanted to compete, play baseball. And so I actually met him at the gym. And so he was there. I think he was probably in his mid-60s maybe at the time. But he was there getting strong. And he was one of the first, if not the first high-level elite baseball players to really embrace strength training way back in the 80s.
Wow.
And the reason that he did it, funny enough, was he tore his rotator cuff and he didn't want to be out. This was back in the day where it's just like literally you do whatever it takes to get on the field, and he wanted to be there for his team. And so he just had to find out a way to strengthen everything around it because he didn't want to have surgery. He would have been out for a year at the time. And now, of course, surgeries have advanced tremendously since then. But so he found that he strengthened everything in his shoulder, but also he started throwing from a completely different arm angle and still won 13 consecutive gold gloves.
It's crazy.
It's crazy.
Backflipping at the same time.
Right. He's out there backflipping with the glove on.
It's cool.
Man, it's so powerful. But it's a big part of what our genes expect is to be strong in some different domain. And we talked about this before the show. That translates over into our lives as well. So that strength, if you can train your body and your mind, because your mind is in play too, life gets a little bit easier in many aspects. You feel more physically ready to handle whatever life throws at you. And so in the context that final one is being able to perform at a high level, to recover from the training that we do. All the magic happens when you're sleeping.
Absolutely.
When you're up in the gym and training, or you're out on the field competing, you're just tearing your body up. That's all catabolic stuff.
Yeah.
You get the anabolic reward when you go to sleep.
When I was interviewing Andrew Huberman, the neuroscientist out of Stanford, he was saying that even learning a new skill, it's like the neurons connect when you're sleeping. Like when I do Spanish class sometimes, I'm just like, I'm not getting this. There's moments where I'm like, gosh, this hurts my brain. It's so challenging. But then I come back the next day or 2 days later and I'm like, oh, I've connected the neurons, or it's like in your sleep, things are moving and processing for you to really connect those things you're learning, those new skills, those challenging things. So I think and if I wasn't sleeping, I probably wouldn't connect the dots on a new skill. So something to think about there as well. I'm curious about this. Have you seen a study around, or any research around how our belief about our identity how we view ourselves in the world. Whether we think positively of ourselves, we have confidence, we believe in ourselves, or our lack thereof, we have a bad view of ourselves. Is there any research about how that affects the brain, our actual mindset of the brain and ourselves?
Absolutely.
Have you seen any of this?
The number one driving force of the human psyche is to stay congruent with the ideas that we carry about who we are. Every thought that we think, every action we take is really correlated with who we believe ourselves to be. And this is why change can be so uncomfortable. You know, when we start to think things that I don't think that way, or these are things that I don't do, our physiology, this stuff really gets hardwired into us. And so it creates discomfort because we're literally going to start creating new neural pathways and potentially start to break down old ones. And a mutual friend, Dr. Caroline Leaf, man, I love her so much. And she's really brought to the forefront. And I talked a little bit about this in Eat Smarter in my new book, and how our thoughts really affect our biology, even how food affects us based on our beliefs about the food. And so one of the biggest things to really come from her work that unfortunately it wasn't embraced, even though she's been in the field for 40 years, she really knows her stuff and has affected so many different lives. But it takes time for kind of collegiate training to change, for the books to change. But one of the big takeaways is thinking, your thoughts create your brain.
Really?
The process of thinking itself is creating your brain. And we think that the brain is, in and of itself, just kind of offshooting our thoughts. Now, we can absolutely have thoughts stored in our brain, but thinking is so much bigger. Our mind is creating our brain.
So thinking is a part of the mind, is that right?
Also the brain as well.
It's both.
Yeah, it's kind of within the brain, then we start to create, as she shares, I don't know if she did this with you, but she brings up the little trees and all these things.
The branches and this.
So we start to create these,
little
with little thought trees start to bear fruits, but we can supersede it. Your mind is bigger than just your brain. We tend to think that because everything is kind of up here, but our mind is in our toe as well. And our mind is just
in our
so
gut.
much. Yeah, in our gut. It's
expansive. I just
expansive.
had Dr. Emran Mayer on.
Yeah.
And he was talking about the mind in the gut and how it's all connected to the brain as well. The gut brain and the brain, and it's fascinating.
It's so fascinating.
The mind is connected throughout your body as well.
Yeah. So, for example, even our heart, within the gut, the human brain itself is just an absolute universe of neurons. So it's like 84 billion neurons, right? I was thinking about human cells overall. So we have about 84 billion neurons in the brain. We have about 100 million in the gut. All right. So this is like nerve tissue. It's like a mass of neural tissue in the gut. But the heart also has neurons as well. So it's called, and anybody can go to Dr. Google and look this up. It's called the heart brain. All right. So your brain, your heart actually has this kind of ability to think, and there's this electromagnetic energy that it's expressing. And there's a field also. It's called a tube torus that's been monitored, that's expanding beyond our body to be able to see this. And if folks want to check out the work from Heart Math Institute, it is phenomenal. I've been, probably for about 10 to 15 years connected with Heart Math Institute. It's just absolutely phenomenal.
So there's a field around the heart. Does that mean like quantum physics we're talking about, or is this something else?
So
what is this field? An energy field.
We'll keep it real simple first, which is if we think about the electrical energy that the heart is kicking off, like when you're in the hospital, right? And you see the monitor, boop, boop. It's not reading the smoke coming off your heart. It's reading the electrical energy that's coming off the heart, right? So we got EKGs and things of that nature. So we can read the electrical currency that the body is throwing off. Wow. Your body is just teeming with energy. And there's even a form of energy that we generate. It's called piezoelectricity, right? Just from moving, we're generating energy and electricity. So just from a very simplistic level, the heart is kicking off energy that we can't see. That's the thing about it, right? It's emanating from beyond us. Even our skin is emanating energy. We just see a certain spectrum of light as humans. We see a certain spectrum of energy.
How far does this energy go beyond the body?
So the tube torus is, from Heart Math Institute's data and being able to measure it and monitor it, it can be upwards of, at last checked, around 8 feet from your body. And so now this is getting into some freaky stuff, all right? And
give it to me.
I'm a very logical, analytical human, so seeing is believing for me. But then we get into, there's many things that are just, and also I'm very open-minded as well. And there's many things that we don't understand. But when we talk about people being in your space and you picking up people's energy and interacting, and that stuff is very real. You know, you can pick up people's vibes, you know, quote, bad vibes. So we don't want to downplay that, because other species of animals, they have that bigger connection. And we can attribute, like bees, for example, you know, in this quote, hive mind, but we throw that away when it comes to us. And so for me, for years, I've been seeking to find, how can I explain this to people to make sense? Because I'm a very solid thinker, you know, I'm a very logical person. And one of the things I came across was Princeton University researchers. They found that they just took two strangers and they put them together and they had them to just chat. And they found out within a matter of minutes, all they had to do was create some rapport and their brain waves started to sync up.
Come on.
Their brain waves started syncing up just by having rapport and talking to another person. We start syncing up. And this happens all the time.
What does that mean that we sync up? The brain is what?
So it's like, again, this is expanding beyond our kind of normal concept of what the brain is. Because it's not just the brain, it's also the mind. It's controlling the brain, right?
The mind is controlling the brain.
Yes.
The brain isn't controlling the mind.
We tend to think that it's the brain that's running the show.
But it's not. The mind. So what is the mind?
Put Dr. Caroline Leaf's episode in with this one. She could dive in deeper on what that is.
Right.
From a more clinical aspect. However, I'll tell you this. The mind it's something that we're still having a hard time to identify what it is and where it's located. That's the thing.
Where is it? Like here? Is it around here?
But
is it in outer space?
It's definitely not in your brain alone.
No.
Your mind is everything about you. Everything about you. The problem is that we tend to think that the brain is the master controller.
But it's not.
It's not. It's
What
absolutely
is?
not. The mind is.
Okay.
The mind. And we still are trying to dictate what the mind is. It's so big and it's so beautiful. It's expansive. So this is the adventure of all this stuff. It's like we get to learn, we get to discover, but as soon as we think that we got it figured out, that's when everything starts to go wrong.
And also it sounds like if the brain isn't optimized through sleep, through nutrition, through healing the inflammation, the chronic inflammation, if that's not optimized, your mind is not going to be optimized.
Yeah.
You're going to be thinking poorly, you're going to be
Yeah.
acting poorly, you're going to be tired, all these different things. So if you want your mind to be sharp, you got to make sure your brain is healthy and recovered and healed. Is that what I'm hearing you say?
It's true. If we're just going to be, again, looking at this from a very foundational, simple principle, it's much more difficult to think the thoughts that we want to think when we don't feel well.
Right. When we don't feel well, we start to think bad thoughts.
It just
hard.
comes together.
It's hard.
Comes together because of so much of our biology is driving our lives, you know, how we feel. But this is the thing, and everybody's seeing this example. We can think externally of our biology. We can change our thoughts and change what's happening with our biology instantly, because every thought that you think has correlating chemistry that's released.
Really?
And
Give me an
also-
example.
So
You think
right now,
about your wife in a loving way.
Man. So I'm gonna start releasing a little bit of oxytocin, you know, a little bit of maybe a little dopamine, you know, a little serotonin.
In the brain,
Yeah.
which then releases.
But it also
def-
depends on the thoughts as well. If it's some sexy thoughts, it might be a little adrenaline or epinephrine
interesting.
produced. You know, just like that, a little bit more aggression might come forward. You know, it just depends. But also, if for example we have a thought where something bad is happening right now, where we're thinking about, you know, maybe we're worried about somebody that we care about. Maybe they've been in some type of an incident of some sort. But maybe we heard some news about it, but it's not true. Okay, so maybe we heard that somebody that we love got into an altercation, right? And we're just like, you know, really upset, like, oh my, I can't believe this happened, I can't believe whatever, and we can start to produce these chemicals associated with that stress. So much more cortisol, right? So a lot of people know about cortisol. Cortisol is not a bad guy. We've talked about this before.
Right.
It's a big
Too
part
much
of our
of it
evolution.
consistently
Too much
hurts you.
especially and chronically. So we start to release all these neurotransmitters, neuropeptides, hormones, all driving us towards worry, fear, anger, regardless if the situation is real or not.
Right.
That's the
We
rub.
make it up.
So we can think external. We can think beyond our current circumstances and change our biology. But if our biology is in a tough place, it's harder to keep trying to do that.
So our thoughts shape our biology. Our thoughts shape
Absolutely.
our feelings,
Your
which
thoughts create your body.
Your thoughts create the body.
So now we get into.
Wow.
I'm going to bring her up one more time.
Yes.
Caroline's work.
She's great.
Yeah. So we had a great conversation about that as well. And actually, an interview that I did with her, it came out recently, and we put our toes in that conversation a little bit more, because this is kind of difficult for us to think about today, because we've been so inundated with the genetic dominant theory that our genes are controlling our lives. And now today, of course, I believe just about everybody listening has heard the term epigenetics at this point, and how these are above genetic controls, like epidermis, like your skin, the outermost part of your skin. So epigenetics is controlling your genetic expression, right? And so humans collectively, we've got maybe 20,000, 22,000 genes collectively. But I think that's going to play out, and you're hearing it here first. I think that number is not quite accurate, but when they did the Human Genome Project, that's what they discovered.
Right.
But why are we so different? It's because of the expression of the genes. There can be 1,000 different outpicturings of one gene, and it could code or express what we would deem to be something negative. But even the negative things are trying to push us towards health. Our body is always adapting, trying to help us to survive.
Trying to realign us and saying, this is not good. You need to pay attention to this and fix it.
Yeah. Even with obesity, our bodies are trying to save us.
How so?
It's trying to save us. So, for example, when we bring in an abnormal amount of sugar, like the way that humans evolved, we didn't have access to sugar like that.
Right.
You know, if you come across a beehive or something, like you're gonna risk getting stung to get some of that. All right. But today we've taken that.
It's just here, eat it all day long. Everything.
It's so remarkable how, and for me, it's a very simple principle of biology.
When did we start getting sugar accessible in this country? What year or decade was this where it was like, oh, sugar's available now?
Here's the beautiful thing. We've always had a hankering for sugar, like through our evolution. We go towards,
fruit,
like I said,
and this,
we'd go for those things, especially, but also is available for some cultures only certain times a year, for example. And so you would rack up on it as well.
Yeah.
And now this is an important tenet as well. And there's a reason for this. The human brain itself, if we think about the blood-brain barrier that protects the brain and only allows in certain things, certain nutrients, it only has gates for certain gases like oxygen. For water, only certain nutrients get into the brain. The brain has its own exclusive diet. But there are a lot of sugar gates. Your brain will gladly confiscate. Harvard researchers uncover this. Your brain will gladly sop up half of the sugar that you take in a meal.
You take 50 grams of sugar, 50% of that, 25 grams is
25
going into the brain.
Going to your brain.
Where's it going? Does it go throughout all the brain? Does it go to a section of the brain? What happens? And it's just filtered throughout and you're just on a sugar high?
Yeah, so even the term sugar high, like it's kind of funny, but that's not funny.
Right.
It's not funny because what happens is, so there are these protein gates that allow the sugar to transfer over through the blood-brain barrier into the brain itself. And yeah, because many of the neurons run off of glucose. So your brain is like, look, give me that. We got stuff to do. Well, let me take all of it. But what happens is over time is it starts to create insulin resistance in the brain as well. All right. So this is one of the biggest issues facing our world today. And if we get into the conversation about inflammation, neuroinflammation, I believe is the most troubling issue that we're facing as a society. But it's a hidden, overlooked issue because the brain is so protective. We don't really know that this is going on until oftentimes it's too late, because the brain itself, we talked about the symptoms of inflammation, pain, swelling, burning. The brain itself doesn't have pain receptors. So your brain can tell you about pain in your pinky toe or on your, pain in your neck, but pain within the brain itself, it doesn't have pain receptors.
What about like a migraine or something? Is that not?
Migraines are not the brain directly expressing pain. It has a lot to do with, now this is a little bit more complicated. There are some offshoots of things happening within the brain with migraines. Let me be clear. So let's just take the borderline migraines are different also. People who experience migraines, they know that it's different, but from a headache. But we'll just take that borderline experience, maybe like an acute migraine or maybe a tough headache. What it really is the blood vessels that surround the brain, that surround your skull, all right, not the brain, but that's surrounding your neck and your shoulders. And so muscle spasms and things of that nature can start to kind of cause restriction, right? So, but there can be some electrical storms taking place in the brain for sure.
Interesting.
But anyway, so the brain itself doesn't experience pain. So this is why, for example, there's, you can have a brain surgery and
not feel
like,
it.
yeah,
you'd
be awake, yeah. And it's
That's
just like
nuts, isn't it?
Yeah, it's so weird.
Wasn't there someone who was like playing violin on a brain surgery? They like opened the
I saw
head
that,
and just like to see if she could still play or make sure there was.
That's like some Total Recall stuff.
That's crazy, man.
Where's Arnold? That was crazy.
That's some like
it's amazing, man. But these are really overlooked simple principles. But going back to that tenet of inflammation. So if the brain can't experience the pain, how do you know when it's on fire? How do you know when it's inflamed?
The brain. You don't know.
Yeah.
Until it's too late.
You don't know. But there are downstream symptoms.
I'm feeling this in my face, my arm, my back, like something, my gut doesn't feel good. There might be a
And it's
signal.
that constant superhighway of the brain-body connection, right? So these researchers at Albert Einstein College of Medicine, they found that neuroinflammation is a double-edged sword for nutritional diseases, metabolic diseases, all right? So what that means is inflammation in the brain is one of the primary causative factors of obesity.
So when you have inflammation in the brain, you're more likely to be obese.
And obesity is a causative agent for neuroinflammation.
So they both hurt each other.
So you're getting into this double-edged sword or vicious circle. And this is why, again, we tend to downplay or belittle people who are struggling with obesity, for example, and not knowing how many programs out there are telling you we need to target the inflammation in your brain for you to get well, for your metabolism to heal.
Yeah, the work that Dr. Daniel Amen is doing, which is, he says the bigger the body, the smaller the brain.
Yeah.
Your brain starts to shrink. I think that's accurate if I remember, but it's like, and you want to really focus on both the nutritional side and the brain, make sure the brain is healthy. And you can heal and recover a lot of the brain from what I'm learning from my scan that I took there. There are ways to optimize the brain, even if you've hurt it in a big way.
Yeah, that's the beautiful part about us. And Daniel's a really good friend. If there's anybody who knows, it's him. He has the biggest database of SPECT imaging scans. He's looking at the brain. He's not just making it up.
Yeah.
And so this is a fact. I talked about this in Eat Smart as well. He actually wrote the cover quote for Eat Smarter.
Nice.
Man, I'm so grateful to have a friend like him because he's just such a wealth of knowledge. But one of the really interesting things is that as your waistline grows, your brain shrinks.
That's crazy.
Right? So we see that, and particularly the gray matter of the brain is going to be inhibited.
So obesity, what does that mean? Obesity impacts the quality of the brain?
Yeah.
And what if 65, 70% of Americans are now obese? That means they have smaller brains, which means they're not going to be able to perform as well. They're going to be more temperamental. They're going to be more mentally unwell, I'm assuming, have more mental health issues, potentially more depression, anxiety, and stress and overwhelm based on obesity.
Yeah. You said it, man.
This is
where it really gets for us scary because we look at the condition and we just like, and me being in this field, I've been in this field almost 20 years. And we'll just say if I got 30 family members, 28 of them are obese growing up. Like I grew up around
obesity,
that, But for me, my genetic cards were a little bit different because I ate worse than everybody. But I had asthma, I had of course you know about the degenerative disc condition, so I had advanced arthritis when I was just a baby. Really, I was
so you had other painful side effects than obesity. By eating poorly.
Expressions. But my fat genes kicked in.
Yeah, eventually after 25, 30, you started to be like,
when I got to 20 and I stopped, because for me also, I was always very active as well. And so now I've got this chronic condition diagnosis, so-called incurable, nothing I can do about it. And now I was given a permission slip to do nothing, and so that's what I did. So again, to get in that state of learned helplessness.
Now, I'm going to ask something that might be controversial. There's a big movement of the accept yourself, self-love no matter how big you are, small you are, like just love yourself where you're at. And, you know, how do we love and accept people for where they're at without shaming them, but also encourage them to improve the quality of their health so that their brain gets bigger and healthier, so that they can live longer, so that they can perform better? Because from what I'm hearing, obesity is not something that's going to make you live longer and healthier.
Yeah. I love this question, man, because the first thing is, I love it because this conversation is bringing to light the fact that we've been inundated with an idea of what beauty looks like. We've been inundated with an idea that thin is better for many years. We've been inundated with an idea that you've got to look a certain way, you've got to have a certain complexion, certain eye color, whatever the case is, to be the epitome of what beauty is. And humanity is so beautiful, so diverse, and so gorgeous, so magical. You know, there's so much beauty and expression, and there are cultures that are just thicker than a Snicker by nature.
Right,
if you talk about, folks,
Polynesian cultures.
Polynesian culture, for example, incredible athletes, and they just right out of the gate, it's going to be a little bit thicker, but that's beautiful. It can be beautiful and it can be healthy. It depends on your genetics, on how much weight you carry and how healthily you can carry it. You maintain your insulin sensitivity, the health of your brain, the longevity, the list goes on and on. There are different, and this is one of the things that I really brought to the fold with Eat Smarter, is your unique metabolic fingerprint. And a part of that metabolic fingerprint is honoring your genetics, right? And so with that said, shifting the culture right now to honor our diversity and our variation of what beauty looks like, and not having this idea that having some body fat is something that's wrong or ugly. That's an absolutely terrible thing. The other part, and it's not even a but, it's and, so we have that acknowledgement, and we have to understand that if you have insulin resistance, you're pre-diabetic, or you're diabetic, or you have heart disease, or you have neural inflammation that we're talking a little bit about, you have allergies and asthma, list goes on and on and on, advanced arthritis, all these different conditions, all these underlying things that can take place, this is going to, in many ways, destroy your quality of life. And we want you to be healthy and a unique expression of what beauty is.
Yes.
That's it.
You don't have to be perfect and have a six-pack and have like a certain amount of body fat, but you got to live a long time. Or if you want to live happy and healthy and not feel these kind of mental health issues as well, this will help that if you're healthier physically, right?
Absolutely, because that goes hand in hand with all the other things that we're seeing as a society, where we're losing so many people prematurely. We're losing lives, but not just that, not just the actual loss of life, but the loss of life while people are still living.
Ooh, what do you mean by that?
When we fall into these places, I lost my grandmother, the love of my life. The love of my life. My grandfather, her and my grandfather were an entity, and so we just had some friends over yesterday, and they were like, "You guys are the only married couple that we know that are like." And I'm just wondering how we have what we have, my wife and I, when I didn't have any examples of a healthy married couple. Like I just pretty much never seen it, never saw it. But I lived with my grandmother when I was a little guy, when I was between the age of about, we'll say, 4 to 8 years old, right? So it's very formative. And for me, that was my earliest memories. And they're an entity, and I'm sure they had disagreements, but all I saw was love.
Wow.
All I saw was them, like his arm around her and just affectionate. She loved him literally to death. And so he ended up having multiple open heart surgeries. And you would think, again, he was hunting, he was foraging, very like outdoor guy, but he was living under chronic stress in the city. He was a country boy, right? And so he was, in this environment, but also when he was noting like, okay, you got a high blood pressure, he also was a very angry guy, Well, he dealt with anger.
Yes.
But not towards us, but just his conditions that he came up around. So now this is very important. The physician, based on his preliminary blood work, which again, I wish I could have been there and to be able to intersect this, it was like, okay, you got to cut the fat. You need to switch out that butter and start to have this partially hydrogenated vegetable oil, which was country crock. It was the first time I saw country crock was in my grandfather's house. And he went from having some blood work issues to having a heart attack,
Oh, man.
to having open heart surgery, to him dying early.
Was he obese or no?
No, he looked incredibly fit,
Wow.
but that was his
Do you
card.
think, do you think it was more stress or the nutrition?
Primarily stress, I feel. Stress, and then also the nutrition that was added in on the recommendations of...
Didn't help.
Right, so we're going from something that's, quote, natural, that humans have been having for centuries, to something that was brand new and invented.
Oh,
you know,
man.
and all the fat. I remember my grandmother getting him like the low-fat peanut butter. And I remember once I got older, I went to their house, I looked at it, it said fully hydrogenated vegetable oil in the peanut butter. And so it's like it's basically exposing it to more hydrogen to try to extend the shelf life of it. It kind of makes like in a strange way, vegetable oil plastic out of it in a sense. But anyways, so bottom line is this, and I'm glad I got a minute to talk about this because it's tough to talk about, but she was around for a while. She was there at my wedding. I felt like she stayed.
Wow.
I felt like she stayed to make sure that I was in good hands, you know?
Wow.
But shortly after that, she died from a overdose. She was depressed, I didn't know.
Really?
And, you know, what the story goes, you know, I don't know if she did it on purpose or not, but, you know, she took her medication and she died.
Shortly after the wedding, or?
Yeah, it's not too
Couple
long
months
after,
or
maybe,
something.
you know, maybe a year later.
Yeah.
But, you know, I lost the love of my life outside of my wife to depression. And, you know, when he left here, like really her identity was so tied to him. You know,
man.
she loved him so much.
Man.
Yeah, so when I'm talking about this stuff, but also her health was going down as well. And I'm just now really starting to hit my stride in understanding this field and helping a lot of people. And, you know, I didn't know, like my grandmother had diabetes, she had this, that issue. She had like the whole pill cabinet.
Oh, man.
And for me growing up in it, it was normalized, you know, and yet we're treating symptoms. And so when we're not in a good state of health, the depression, it can be more invasive.
Yeah.
It can be harder to deal with. They come together. So
Hard to deal
my
with. It's
point
hard to
that-
get out of it.
Yeah. My point that I want to share is when we're venturing into these outward states of inflammation, because even our fat cells themselves are an inflammatory factor. They're putting out a distress signal that's letting your body think in a sense that you're infected. And the fat cells themselves are creating inflammation, right? If we talked about that again, that systemic chronic inflammation, it's just literally checking all boxes for a bad event to take place. Whether it's depression, which depression now we've got sound data on it having an inflammatory component, depression, heart attack, stroke, dementia, the list goes on and on and on. And a big catalyst for this, about 400,000 people die each year from obesity-related conditions. And it's
Really?
just a footnote.
Is that like they have type 2 diabetes, or they get stress, or they have heart attacks because of obesity, or what are those main?
So these are comorbidities, right? So these are comorbidities.
They're obese, but they die from something else.
Right. But that's there
400,000 people every year?
every year, yeah.
You think if they weren't obese, that they wouldn't die?
The obesity is it's kind of fueling the flames of the inflammation, for example. It's fueling the flames of the metabolic dysfunction,
Right.
right? So
You could still look healthy and die of a heart attack. You hear that sometimes where it's like,
but today it's the exception, not the rule.
Right.
The majority of the time,
Right.
it's related to being overweight and
or
obese.
it's probably with stress or some type of like inner, stress. Maybe you don't look unhealthy, but inside you're not able to deal with anger or resentment or stress or shame or whatever it
Your
is.
thoughts are creating chemistry in your body.
Man,
Period.
crazy, isn't it?
It is. It's powerful, man. The best time to eat something that we would consider like a treat or like, we'll just say pizza or
Ice cream,
cake or
like-
donut.
It's when?
It's when we're feeling good. But we tend to do it when we're feeling
It's so
bad.
true. It's when something's not going well in a relationship
So it
or
tends to
it's something
be-
at work. We're like, I just want to.
It tends to compound the issue, but also they can be, if it's done with intentionality, it can be a part of the healing process. That's the thing too, because again, we get so black and white with stuff like, You shouldn't be doing this, shouldn't be doing that. It makes us humans, we don't like rules in a sense. Like it makes us want to rebel against the thing, and so it can be a part of the process, but we have to maintain integrity. Because for example, carbohydrates, it's really interesting that, and I actually did a masterclass on this on my show recently, talking about natural, clinically proven ways to increase serotonin production in our bodies. And so serotonin it's a dual hormone and neurotransmitter. So it has multiple impacts on our endocrine system and on our nervous system. But serotonin is noted to be like this feel-good vibe to it. Like when serotonin is optimized, like a lot of antidepressants target serotonin.
Okay.
They're selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors. But it's not making you produce more. It's just trying to reduce the metabolism of it so it stays in your system longer in a sense. But that's a whole other thing. So bottom line is this. Carbohydrates actually increase serotonin levels.
Makes you feel better.
In a sense. Now, this isn't 100% true across the board, but it's seen in peer-reviewed evidence that having a little whack of some carbohydrates can actually increase serotonin.
Little French fries,
Yeah, make you feel, get a little bit of hit of feeling good. So, but we have to put that in its proper place. We've all experienced this, but we think it's the sugar high. It's not just that. It's what it does to your neurochemistry. It's what it does to your hormones. That's really, it's so much deeper.
What do carbs do to your hormones?
Well, it depends on the type of
Quality,
carbohydrates.
the quality of carbs, yeah.
You know what I mean?
And what time of day and everything.
Yeah, so but let's be clear. I mean,
Doesn't your brain run on carbs? Like, doesn't it run on like sugar and carbs?
so this goes back to, and I think this is an important place for us to get here, is that the brain, as I mentioned, the blood-brain barrier has a tremendous amount. I think about the blood-brain barrier being like a massively complex toll booth. And at each of the tolls, there's like the best security guard in the world, like Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, or like whoever people want to put in their mind. Maybe somebody really tough. Maybe, I don't know, the Hulkster.
Right.
I've been watching these A&E. Have you seen any of those?
I've heard they're amazing. The wrestling documentaries.
Yeah.
I gotta watch these. Yeah.
So maybe it's Macho Man.
Yeah.
Maybe he's at the toll booth, but they're only allowing certain things into the brain's very exclusive area. Sugar has speed passes to get into the brain. As I mentioned, Harvard researchers have affirmed your brain will gladly confiscate half of the sugar you consume in a meal. All right. Now, with that said, what is the blood-brain barrier? How does this play into the inflammation whole complex? So the blood-brain barrier, it is something that is basically around the blood vessels. It's made from endothelial cells. So very similar to our cardiovascular system. All right, so we have the endothelial cells, but the difference with the blood-brain barrier endothelium is that it is massively higher in mitochondria. So these are these energy power plants in all of our cells that are kicking off ATP. All right, so these are like the metabolic nuclear power plants in our cells, right? So your blood-brain barrier has a tremendous amount of these mitochondria. That's another reason it's so hungry for energy too. To protect your brain, it's running on a lot of energy. It's taking the energy to do that. So we've got the blood-brain barrier, but the blood-brain barrier is one of the major issues that's getting targeted and broken down by the way that we eat today. So now stuff is getting into the brain that shouldn't be there.
Really?
So now the question is, what is causing the breakdown of the blood-brain barrier? I'll give you a few of those things.
Yes.
And creating more inflammation in the brain. One of them, as we already talked about, is sugar. Rampant amounts of sugar. And I want to be clear, I'm not trying to demonize sugar. And some people might be like, you should demonize it. It's a part of our culture. And we don't want to make it so that something is inherently terrible and this treacherous thing, and something else other than is the best thing. All right. So we know that sugar is not ideal for human consumption, this heavily refined processed thing. We know that, okay? That we can look at things as good and not so good. It's not so good, all right? Now, with that said, the amount of sugar that we're consuming, it can actually kind of create this insulin resistance taking place in the brain, like I mentioned before, and create neuroinflammation and break down all surrounding tissues. So, and also cause a big fit for the microglial cells in the brain, the brain's immune system. So what takes place is, it's even systemic. So diabetes with the rest of our body can cause also offshooting insulin resistance in the brain as well. But the brain itself, our neurons can begin to become insulin resistant. And so now we've got this sugar just kind of roaming free in the brain and tearing up stuff. All right, so that's a big problem. So sugar, number one. Number two, alcohol.
Yep.
All right, now, again,
Man, you gotta upset a lot of people.
I'm not saying people can't drink, but we just have to be aware of this, that specifically, and there's a lot of peer-reviewed evidence on this now, alcohol is a known neurotoxin.
Yeah.
Right? And so what it does is, it is able to actually cross the blood-brain barrier. It's one of those things that can cross the blood-brain barrier, which a lot of stuff can't get into the brain. It's able to cross the blood-brain barrier. And one of the first things that happens, though, is the release of endorphins. It makes
It's like sugar.
It makes us feel good.
Yeah.
So we know that alcohol is a well-established neurotoxin, but we don't see it like that. It's socially acceptable.
Very socially acceptable.
But a significant amount of people actually pass away each year from alcohol poisoning. And they can be perfectly healthy and just have a little bit too much. And it can affect the parts of the brain that are responsible for breathing, that are responsible for, beating your heart. These are some of the ways that we can die from alcohol poisoning. Now, it's very unlikely, it's highly unlikely that will happen, but we just got to keep this in place. And as a matter of fact, this was published in the BMJ, one of the most prestigious journals, the British Medical Journal. They found that even moderate drinking can have these very similar effects to accelerating brain shrinkage.
Well, this is what Dr. Daniel Amen has in his brain scans, that I think there was 80,000 brain scan in a test, don't quote me on that, but that's what I remember, where it's like, he showed the brains without alcohol and with, and I think all of them were smaller, or something like that. Like some were way worse than others with moderate alcohol. Maybe it's like once or twice a week, 1 or 2 glasses a week or something, a shrinkage of the brain. And I want to find the exact stat of what that is. But I mean, it's like, if we know this information, why do we keep doing it to ourselves?
Yeah.
And maybe we don't know the information, and that's why we just think it's socially acceptable, and we're going to be with our friends, we're going to have drinks, and 1 turns into 3, turns into 5, and then we can't wake up the next morning. But why do we do it over and over again? I've never been drunk in my life, and I'm not saying I have nothing against people drinking, but if it's hurting the brain, if you're doing it consistently, more than once or twice a week, if you know it's going to hurt your brain, why continue to do it?
Yeah, that's you just brought it up, which is, I don't think most folks actually know. We don't know we might know on a superficial level,
right?
But we haven't had the same amount of education in these things where it's a part of the culture as much as ignoring health. We're just in an unhealthy state, period. But so in this study, they actually used MRIs and uncovered that even moderate drinking over long term causes significant brain shrinkage, specifically the hippocampus, which is the memory center of the brain. Now, it appears that the amount of shrinkage in the study appears to be directly related to how much a person drinks.
Right.
Now,
so if you drink once a week, you should be fine.
Yeah, I mean, even a couple of times a drink. So moderate drinking would be, get into the category of, we'll say, even 4 to 5 nights a week, 1 to 2.
1 glass of wine or something.
Servings of alcohol, depends on what it is, right? But for some people, that might be too much. But for some folks, most of the data, what we do know is heavy drinking. Right, but even moderate drinking, we've got to be mindful of our brain.
Yes,
we've got to take that into consideration.
I mean, listen, I'm not here to shame anyone, because I eat, probably more sugar than anyone should have in my lifetime, and that's my vice. That's something that it's like on the weekends, like I'm splurging on sugar.
You just murdered the cookies. We were
murdering
just at my
cookies,
house.
man. I murdered your cookies, and what I have, like 7, 8 cookies. I don't know. So it's like I'll give myself a couple of days where it's like, okay, this is what I'm going to do, and I don't beat myself up for it, because I know the rest of the time I'm not doing that. So some people might do that with alcohol, and that's fine. Sugar's gonna hurt me or create more belly fat. It's gonna be harder to get rid of the belly fat, all these other things, and I'm aware of it. So it's like, how can I continue to optimize? How can I continue to let go of that habit and replace it with something more powerful and empowering for the greater version of myself, for my vision, for my health and happiness. And when I have it, enjoy it, but don't do it too much,
But that's the secret too, man, is that we also had an abundance of real food as well, So at my place is where you first, you didn't just, you tried guacamole recently,
Right. I had
previously.
it once before with a friend, and I was like, wow.
You just dabbled in it, but now.
But at yours, I had a lot of it, man.
You got it. You got that guac in you, man.
I liked it.
And
your wife made it amazing, though. It was like, I don't think I can have normal guacamole. I think it was like, it's got to be seasoned the right way,
It's in Eat Smarter.
Is that the way the recipe? It's so good.
So I was growing up the way that I did. I didn't know what avocados were. I had no idea until I was in my 20s.
Hot Pockets.
Yeah. So, and I mean, honestly, man, I ate fast food every day.
Yeah.
As long as I had like $2 at least
Absolutely,
every
man.
day
It's chicken
when I
nuggets
was in college.
Yeah.
But it also is just in the environment. You know, the closest thing to me was
Mm-hmm.
a liquor store, then, you know, Lee's Chicken, Domino's, McDonald's, Burger King, Dairy Queen, Chinese food restaurant. But this was like bulletproof glass. Like they're not cooking good stuff for you. Arby's, Krispy Kremes, Jack in the
man.
Box. This is all within like a mile radius of my house.
Kreme,
And that's not even all of them. Papa John's. I can go
Everything.
on and on and on.
Yes.
In multiple directions. There wasn't a gym around me. That wasn't a part of the environment. You know, being from Ferguson, Missouri, that's where, you know, I spent my my entire time, you know, in college, and also just even when I got married, you know, we're still in Ferguson, Missouri, Ferguson, Florissant, for the majority of my adult years actually was in Ferguson, Florissant. And so we just we weren't exposed to what health looked like. The first time when I found out that a Whole Foods existed, like it's so far away from me, but there was only one in all of St. Louis, by the way, at the
Now
time.
you live like 3 blocks from one.
You could in
LA.
LA, you can literally throw a rock and hit a Whole Foods.
I know.
I mean, it's crazy.
amazing.
I'm not used to this.
It's amazing,
I'm just
right?
not. It's wonderful. It's wonderful. It's upgrading. But the thing is, also, we can get this conversation of being fashionable
Right.
and being about real health, because
course.
there are definitely some challenges on what real health is here in this city as well.
Sure.
You know? So, but anyways, that's a little sidebar.
So
but
sugar, alcohol, which is a neurotoxin. What's another thing that increases neuroinflammation?
another one, and this is really interesting, and this is very timely for this. What I was actually going to lead into was right now being aware of what real health is in the prevention and susceptibility to viral infections. Viruses can damage and break down the blood-brain barrier, create inflammation in the brain.
I mean, a virus.
Listen to this. So this was published in the peer-reviewed journal Trends in Microbiology, found that viruses can directly disrupt and damage the blood-brain barrier. But here's what I wanted to share with you, and this is new. I'm sharing this for the first time. This was published in the International Journal of Molecular Sciences, and it found that there's a troubling discovery recently that SARS-CoV-2 is able to interact with the blood-brain barrier and enter the brain itself. All right,
What does that mean? How do you get it out of the brain?
That's the thing. Once it gets in there, it doesn't even matter. Like, what are the downstream effects of that? So this virus is able to make its way to basically traverse the blood-brain barrier somehow. Maybe the blood-brain, and this for me, I always think of a meta perspective. Like, what are the samples?
Yeah.
Right. What is the state of health of the person? What is their
there might
blood-brain
be some
barrier
other
health?
stuff, yeah.
How is it able to traverse the blood-brain barrier and get into the brain? Or is it just this virus is this particularly nefarious? You know what I mean? And so the question is, what do we do about this in defense? We have to be as healthy as possible. We know that even though the marketing around this is that this particular virus is indiscriminately hurting people, but I think maybe we shared this when I talked with you last, I'm not sure, but I think it's an important point. I've got many family member and friends who are in the healthcare industry and even working on the front lines. And we tend to think that, of course, number one, they're going to be hardest hit. It would be obvious if you think about it.
They're around it all day long.
Right. And these are just absolutely amazing folks. However, what folks don't realize, and we can maybe put the link to this in the show notes for people, because this is what I do. I'm a research scientist, almost 20 years in this space. If you go to the CDC site and you look at who is actually being affected, because with healthcare workers, it is the biggest vocation being affected, if we're talking about job for job, by SARS-CoV-2. But what's not shared and what's on the CDC site is that 9 out of 10 of the healthcare workers hospitalized with COVID-19 had at least one pre-existing chronic disease.
Ooh.
It's not 2 out of 10. It's not 5 out of 10. 9 out of 10.
9 out of 10 had
9
a
out of 10.
pre-existing chronic.
At least one.
Wow.
So it's not indiscriminate, okay?
Yeah.
Because we've got, at this point, people have got the PPE. There's still a susceptibility. And the other part is about 75% of them were clinically obese. And it's right there. The CDC is where people, if you post anything, talk about it's getting directed to the CDC. But most people are not analyzing the data on the CDC. I love it.
Right.
I love it. But also it's highlighting, again, the thing that's not getting addressed, which is let's get our citizens healthier.
Healthy.
When are we going to talk about helping to reduce this epidemic, these multiple epidemics? Pandemics is epidemic expanded kind of multiple places.
What is the epidemic? Is it neuroinflammation? Is it obesity? What is the main causes in your mind that is hurting us?
Yeah. We have an epidemic of chronic disease, period.
Chronic
we have
disease.
epidemics of, for example, an average of 630,000 people die from heart disease every year here in the United States.
600,000
630,000.
die from a heart disease.
Heart disease.
And what causes
Every
heart
year.
disease? Stress, obesity, neuroinflation. What else?
It's a complex disease. It's
Yeah.
the number one killer.
It's
But
crazy.
here recently, and this is the unfortunate thing is that this is a footnote. It's not even talked about. 2020, when SARS-CoV-2 was the headline, almost 700,000 people died from heart disease. It jumped up significantly.
Really? Because of the stress.
Because of all things, all of it.
Wow.
Absolutely. Stress, disconnection from
Loved
family.
ones. Yeah, wow.
We're eating worse than we ever have prior to the pandemic. Because I was there, I was analyzing the numbers right out of the gate. The first couple of months, I was looking at processed food companies. I was looking at their profits.
Oh, they're probably spiked.
One company was about to go out of, one of the big ones was about to go out of business.
And then-
they're filing for bankruptcy. COVID
Shut
saved them.
up.
Gyms closed, people
People
not
weren't working
exercising,
out.
people
So
not
sitting
getting
around
out.
home, you're getting Postmates or you're getting Uber Eats or whatever it is
We
delivered
are
to you
now
all day.
far worse. We are now far sicker and more susceptible to viral infections than when it all started, because we still have not focused on health. And we can do all the superficial treatments. We can do the distancing, we can do fill in the blank.
Right.
But we also, because we were in fear, because people were so influenced by what the quote experts were saying, we could have also said, this is an important time for you to really make sure that you are getting your sleep, because your sleep is a primary controller of your immune system. Even with medical interventions and people taking an array of drugs, whatever
Yes.
type of drug they might be, whether it's a oral medication, injectable, and their ability to actually prevent the disease dramatically goes down when people are sleep deprived.
When they're sleep deprived. Wow.
Yeah, because your immune system it's largely regulated. The vast majority of our immune system is located in our gut, for example. And one of the things that we've noticed is that there's even a changing of the guard that takes place with our microbiome, even as the day goes on. The microbiome is so easily influenced by small things. I mean, if you sneeze, like your microbiome is going to make a shift, But
Really?
when we're sleep deprived, there are some really negative things that take place. And one of the studies that I actually mentioned is they took test subjects and they wanted to see what would happen when they just cross a bunch of time zones and see what would happen with their microbiome. And so they took stool samples, had them poop in a little nacho basket. That's how we do it. We could send you one in the mail. You could send it in and get a stool sample done. But they took stool samples and they analyzed their microbiome cascade. Because one of the things that we know today is that there's a microbiome cascade that's associated with obesity, insulin resistance.
Interesting.
So when people in my clinical practice, they can get a stool sample done, I can get the report, I can have a high probability of knowing what their body composition is just based off their bacteria cascade,
crazy.
whether or not they're obese. And so we know this now. And so what they did was, and these are healthy test subjects, and then they have them cross a bunch of time zones and they retest them. So it was like a 10-hour time difference. And they found that the bacteria basically get this kind of very strange jet lag.
Really?
And their bacteria cascade started to shift more towards one that's associated with obesity and insulin resistance just in a day.
By traveling across time zones.
Just in one day.
So what should we do when we travel across?
Because also, I didn't mention this, their sleep is disrupted as a result.
they're not sleeping because of it.
Right,
Yeah,
so
they're
their sleep is
sleeping less.
disrupted as a result. But the good news is, just by them getting back onto a routine, within a couple of days it normalized. So we can get better, but we know how quickly things can go wrong. And this is another big part of this equation, because there was a lot of pushback happening in the beginning, even with many of my friends and colleagues who are just at the top level of the health space, of like, well, we just have to do these superficial things because we can't get people healthier overnight. And here we are, we're going on 2 years here soon. All right, we're over a year and a half into this. And the conversation has not shifted to getting, what are some of the clinically proven things, simple things people can do to fortify their immune system and help to reduce their risk of chronic diseases, because we know that is the number one thing.
What are those
It's
things?
the number one risk
Those
factor.
things? Sleep, healthier foods, fasting,
I'll give
intermittent
you
fasting.
an example.
More water. What's the?
Based off peer-reviewed evidence. So researchers at Appalachian State University found that simply just going for a short walk,
In nature? Or
instantly, just anywhere, just go for a 20, 30-minute walk, boosts your immune parameters, most notably for neutrophils and also natural killer cells.
Wow.
right? It's a temporary boost.
Yeah.
But what if you're doing this consistently? Like America, make sure that you wash your hands, socially distance, but also make sure you get in your 20-minute walk today, America.
Right.
We can create an absolute transformation in our culture because people will do it.
Get 1,000 steps, right? Screw 10,000, get 1,000 steps in, right? Something.
If this is framed as a way to help you to defend your body from this nefarious condition, which it is, we know that the biggest susceptibility. I'll share this with you as well. And this again, it was on the CDC site. Over 95% of the people who passed away with SARS-CoV-2 on the death certificate had an average of 4 pre-existing chronic diseases and or comorbidities.
Really?
4.
95%.
Over 95% had an average
4 pre-existing
and
conditions.
or comorbidities. So it's not just
What's a comorbidity?
So it could be they have SARS-CoV-2, but then they also have influenza. They have SARS-CoV-2, but they also have pneumonia. Right? So these are all comorbidities.
Gotcha.
But we know that at least one pre-existing chronic disease across the board is included in that.
Now, what about the chronic disease?
But what we focus on, though, unfortunately, is just the people that are quote perfectly healthy.
Right.
The less than 5%.
And showcasing these people and be like, look, this person died too.
And so we don't talk about the underlying issue, which is again getting people healthier. But here's the thing too, which the perfectly healthy aspect, that's all still going to be debatable because you and I can be as healthy as we want to be. If we are in a state where we're really stressed, we're in fear, we are, in a position where we are sleep deprived temporarily, our immune system can absolutely get trampled on.
Heightened or
and it's
whatever,
going to
yeah.
increase our risk, our susceptibility to viral infection.
This is what I was mentioning to you about. When I was a kid growing up, my dad wouldn't allow us to, he would turn the TV or he would mute it if there was ever medical commercials on. If there was ever drug commercial, things like that, or alcohol. He actually would mute or turn the channel so that we wouldn't be susceptible to all the different messaging of the medical industry. If you're feeling this, you need X, Y, and Z medicine. And he really believed that that was causing a lot more fear in us kids when we would consume and watch this commercial, this messaging, this influence over and over, because it was pretty much every other commercial was like a drug commercial, from what I remember. Because he was always turning it off.
Yeah,
he was always turning the channel because he wouldn't want us to be consumed by fear. What about the chronic disease, if that's even considered that, of fear in the country and in the world? We could be as healthy as possible, but if you have fear in your mind consistently thinking, I'm going to get this, or I got to protect myself, what about eliminating fear? How do we do that?
I love you. This is why, this is
Let's
going
go
right
greatest,
to,
baby.
listen, I have not shared this yet.
Bring it.
This is from the CDC. And so they were looking at 4,899,447 hospitalized adults and 540,667 patients with COVID-19, of whom 95% had at least one underlying medical condition. But let me tell you the strongest risk factor for death when they actually contracted the virus. The strongest risk factors for death, and this is according to the CDC, and these for folks listening and even watching, some of this stuff is seeing is believing. So we've got to put this in the show notes for people to be able to analyze
you can see the actual notes from the CDC.
You can see the study.
Yeah.
The strongest risk factor for death, number 1 was obesity, which we've already talked about. Number 2 was anxiety and fear-related disorders.
Oh my gosh.
Number 3 was diabetes with complications.
Oh my gosh.
The
Fear and
second-
anxiety-related issues. Wow. That was the number 2 reason for death.
Number 2.
Based on the CDC.
Number 2, risk factor.
Risk factor.
Associated with death.
Oh, wow. Risk factor. Okay. Man. And how much of that has to do with the brain and mindset?
Nobody's talking about this. What happened during the past year and a half?
Oh my
Has our fear levels gone up or down?
Oh, in general, up.
Exponentially.
Yeah.
Exponentially. And this gets into the place of ethical information, with the media.
Wow.
And, some folks might have seen some of the exposés done on, some of the news organizations getting caught on like a hot mic, for example, and admitting that they're putting the death toll.
The CNN, I think, or something.
I shared that. I was like
that.
the first person. I packaged it up. Now, I didn't do the report though.
Right.
But I just created like this viral thing because I did some of the science behind what was happening as well. So they admitted to putting up the technical
death
director.
count, right?
Yeah, the death toll ticker on there, taking human lives and turning it into a death toll ticker.
Anxiety, you see that go up like every moment.
He admitted to doing it because it drives fear and it keeps people watching.
Oh my
He admitted it
gosh.
with his own mouth, And so, and also one of the things I put into the culture very early on, I also did the counterbalancing thing, which is like I want to be informed, but we don't have to be inundated. Also share the recoveries.
Right.
Let's have a recovery ticker. Let's have people who are, who have asymptomatic, who might have contracted the virus, but they're not sick and they're okay. Their immune system did what it was supposed to do. Let's have that ticker as well. And I put that in the culture, and the person who was capturing the data, she asked him that, like, why don't you have a recovery ticker as well? He's like, he thought about it for a minute. He was like, that's not scary.
It's not scary. People won't watch. We need to make money.
That's it.
We're trying to get eyeballs.
If we get down to what it's really all about and the corporate interest now, because news isn't news anymore, it's entertainment. Mm-hmm. And a lot of folks don't realize that practically every major news station shares at least one board member with a pharmaceutical company.
It's crazy.
And the pharmaceutical industry invests billions of dollars every single year into media. Billions of dollars. What are they going to do? Are they going to recommend, have me on, which I've been on all the major news networks, but people aren't tuning in for that.
Right.
They're not tuning in to hear me talk about, drinking water and getting sleep.
Man.
You know what I mean? But I still do that stuff just to plant some seeds. But truly, people are tuning in to be inundated with fear, catch the sports and the weather. And he also shared that 90% of the content that they do is around fear-based content, but then they have a nice story. He says like at the end, and he said this was with his words, he was like, to be like a little bit of ice cream at the end of the pain.
Oh my gosh.
To help to alleviate the pain, but we're about to hit you with more of it.
Oh.
And this is the thing.
That's why I don't watch news.
Yeah,
I don't watch the news. I might flip it on for a moment to be like, okay, what actually happened here? But I can't consume it for hours. Otherwise, it just makes me feel sick. Yeah. It makes me feel sad, depressed, frustrated. And I think I'd rather be informed and educated and be able to take action on what I need to do personally in my life, or if there's a cause I need to support, from a place of mission and purpose and intention as opposed to reaction, fear, anger, and reaction. And I think a lot of people have responded with reacting out of a place of fear as opposed to responding from a place of mission, love, solutions, community. And I think if we can start to shift that, we'll just feel better all in all.
This is all really pointing to one of the most important takeaways from this conversation, really just in our world today, period, is how we might think that we're controlling the way that we think. We might think that we are making decisions based on logic, but we have very primal programming as well. And we're very influenced by the world around us. We're hardwired because it's a defensive mechanism. Mm-hmm. It's helping us to get to this point. We have to be aware of threats. But the way that we live today, it's not normal threats. We're not in threat of starvation necessarily in our
threats.
culture. We don't have to worry about a tiger out there.
Yeah.
What it really is, it's a lot of manufactured fear. Gosh. Not to say that there aren't real world threats.
Right.
But the vast majority of people are safe.
Safe.
But you would never know that if you ever turn on the news. And so now here's the problem is that when we're exposed to these things, we take it with us. This was published in the International Journal of Behavioral Medicine. And people were instructed to watch just 15 minutes of the news. And they were actually tracking their mood disturbances, tracking their metrics. And they ended up having increased levels of anxiety and mood disturbances. But that's nothing. Here it is. The most shocking part is, even after distracting them with another activity after watching the news, they were not able to return to their baseline levels of mood. They picked up that anxiety,
they carried
mood
it.
disturbance, and they took it with them.
Wow.
That's the thing that we don't really think about, is that it really does, especially if it gets deep driven, it starts to change our chemistry. It changes our biology, and it also can change our brain because we're thinking thoughts when we're seeing that stuff. How thinking and thoughts really get created is it's like taking something that you don't know and connecting it to something that you do know. So a fear thought, a strong fear, is going to connect with a lot of other fear instances that you have already in your filing cabinet.
Other fears. It's going to stack.
It's going to start stacking. And we tend to see this happen, like we play this out in relationship context, like if you get into it about one thing, it gets tied to all the other problems that you have with the person.
Right.
It's one of the, but we can use that for our good as well, and understanding how we learn stuff. And even how I teach, I like to take something that people might be aware of and then connect it to something that is new. So in Eat Smarter, I take people through and teaching them how the fat loss process works by giving an analogy of going to the movies.
Right.
You know what I mean? So, but on the other side, if we're not aware that this is taking place, that we're getting this exposure of fear, it's changing our neurochemistry and our perception of everything. It's coloring the way that we see the world, and it's connecting to all the other fears that we have. Not all the other fears, but other fears, especially when we're talking about imminent death. For what the media perceives, the reality is very different. Now, this is something that we definitely need to be aware of, be cautious of, because even the origin of it is complicated. Like there was a time where even if you talked about the origin being other than what was disseminated in the beginning, people were getting censored and all this crazy stuff, and we're not having logical, rational conversations about science. That's not science. Science is open. Science is constantly looking, and this is the key. This is going to sound absolutely nuts. And a big reason why I feel that I'm in this space at this level is because I'm willing to be wrong. Like I'm coming into it, hoping
you're wrong.
Yes, I know that I have a cognitive bias. I know that I have cognitive biases towards what humans have done the longest. And so if anything comes up against that, right? So for me, it's just like, okay, well, humans have been eating real whole foods for, countless, centuries and thousands of years. And now we got a Twinkie, right? So just like, well, maybe the Twinkie, for me, my cognitive bias is that Twinkie is probably not ideal, but I could be wrong. And I'm open because this Twinkie might have unlocked some genetic, whatever, dormant thing where we're like, I don't know, we can teleport or something.
Right.
I'm open to being wrong, but my bias is there. But I have to come into it with my bias and look for the ways that I'm wrong. It's hard to do, but it's like a muscle. Eventually you get to a place where it's beautiful. It's like a joyous thing. Hey, if you like this video, make sure to check out this video right here to up-level your health today. Oftentimes when you have an injury or an issue like this, we're told not to do anything. That's often the worst thing you can do because things will start to atrophy. If you don't use it, you lose it.